My name is Grace Morgan, and I am 58 years old. At my son's wedding reception, the one I paid $47,000 for, my new daughter-in-law raised her glass, looked at me in front of 200 guests, and said the best gift I could give her marriage would be walking out of this family for good. The room gasped. The quartet stopped mid-note. My son studied his shoes. I set down my champagne. I walked out to the terrace, and I made one phone call. What happened in the next 14 minutes is why that bride wishes she had chosen her words more carefully. But you should understand what 9 years of silence had been paying for first, because in my family, nobody ever asked where the money came from. They only asked when the next check was coming. 9 years ago, my husband Richard collapsed on a job site outside Columbus. Stroke. He was 52. I was 49. Our son Daniel was 23, 3 weeks out of college with a marketing degree and a car payment. Grief has paperwork, and I have always been good at paperwork. I had built an accounting firm out of our kitchen table over 20 years, 9 employees, half the small businesses in town on my client list. So when the hospital sent bills, I filed them. When the funeral home quoted me a casket package with a straight face, I asked for the itemized version and the price dropped by $1,100 on the spot. Numbers held still for me when nothing else did. What I did not see, standing in that quiet house with a stack of folders where a marriage used to be, was that I had started speaking to my son in the only language grief left me. Money. He would call, and I would hear his father's laugh buried in his voice, and whatever he needed, I had already said yes before he finished asking. Daniel never once asked me for money outright. That's the part that took me years to understand. He would mention things. A Sunday call about football would drift 20 minutes into a sigh about a transmission repair or a security deposit. He never had to lower himself to asking. I never got the dignity of being asked. The money just moved, quiet as a thermostat, and we both pretended the house had warmed itself. At my office, I gave a speech every tax season to sweet, overextended clients. If you can't write it down where you can see it, it isn't generosity, it's a leak. Then I would drive home and wire my son $400 for a golf weekend he'd mentioned once. I balanced books for half the town, and there was one column of my own life I never let myself total, because I already knew what the number would do to me. 6 years ago, a debt counselor called me from Daniel's bank. $41,500. 5 credit cards and a truck he never should have financed. He sat at my kitchen table with his ears red, 26 years old and looking exactly like he had at 9, the day he put a baseball through the Hendersons' window. I paid it. All of it the following Monday. But I did something that surprised him. I drew up a promissory note. Principal of $41,500, interest at the federal rate, payable on demand. My husband used to say paper keeps love clean, and I am a CPA. If I was going to love somebody with money, the file was going to be immaculate. Daniel signed it without reading past the second line. Sure, Mom. Invoice me, he said, and we ordered a pizza. Every December after, I forgave that year's interest with a one-line letter and filed it in a folder he never knew existed. He never made a payment on the principal. For 6 years, both of those facts felt like love. The house came a year later. His credit was wrecked from the debt mess, and no bank in Ohio would touch him. I bought a brick colonial on Maple Street outright in my own name, $315,000 cash, 28 years of 12-hour days finally spent on something. I sat him down and told him plainly, "This is my house, you pay me rent, and someday when the ground under you is solid, we'll talk about the deed like adults." $850 a month. Market rate on that street was $2,200. He called it mom rent, hugged me and moved in. What nobody knew, not Daniel, not my sister Karen, not a single soul, was what I did with that $850 every month. I opened an account at my old branch the week he moved in, and every single payment he made went straight across, untouched, into that account with his name on the file tab in my desk. He thought he was paying me. He was paying himself. He just didn't know it yet. 60 months, $850 at a time. $51,000. Sitting there like a present wrapped so far in advance you forget which closet you hid it in. Then 3 years ago, Daniel called me with a shine in his voice I hadn't heard since before his father died. He'd met someone. Her name was Brooke Foster. The first time she walked into my house, she complimented the crown molding before she complimented me. 26, an event coordinator, pretty the way a catalog is pretty. She gave me her family's story in one smooth, rehearsed paragraph. Father in furniture, Mother Patricia on every charity committee in the county. But her eyes worked the whole dinner, moving along my bookshelves and china cabinet the way an appraiser's eyes move, not a guest's. She lifted her glass at one point and toasted to self-made men, looking at my son who was sitting in a house I owned on tires I had paid for, and said not one correcting word. 2 springs ago they got engaged. At the party, Patricia Foster worked the patio like a woman running for office. My sister Karen appeared at my elbow with her retired schoolteacher whisper that carries 30 feet. Their furniture stores went under in 2009, she told me. The bank took their lakeside house. I told her to hush, but I filed it away with everything else I'd noticed. The leased Audi, the country club they belonged to but never seemed to eat at. What unsettled me more that night was my son's pronouns. We think fall weddings are overdone. We're leaning toward a vineyard. Every we had Brooke inside it. None of them had me. The wedding bills never came to me directly. They arrived sideways, a Sunday call. A size shaped exactly like my checkbook. By the week of the wedding the total out of my accounts was $47,000. Every invoice tabbed, because that is simply how I am built. There was a wedding group chat I was never added to. Decisions arrived to me as announcements. And 3 weeks out, I found a page on their wedding website called Our Story, describing my son as a self-made man who'd bought his first home before 30. There was a photograph of the Maple Street house under that sentence. My house, presented online as evidence of a man I had personally financed into existence. I called Daniel that night. I told him Brooke needed to know the truth before the wedding, not after. He told me gently, the way he talks to difficult clients, that she already knew everything, that her family was just weird about money, and to please not make this a thing. I held that for 3 more weeks on my son's word alone. 2 weeks before the wedding, at a dinner in the Foster's half-staged house, I took a wrong turn looking for the powder room and heard Patricia's voice through a cracked door, low and hard, telling her daughter to keep her face on Saturday and after, that they didn't owe anyone anything anymore. And Brooke, small and young, answering, "I know, Mom. I remember." I understood in that hallway exactly what kind of household had raised her. It explained everything. It excused nothing. The slights came like a drip line after that. My toast, promised, quietly canceled by Brooke herself. The timeline was too tight, she said. The seating chart put me at table 9 by the kitchen doors. The printed program read, hosted by the Foster family. In italics on cardstock my florist invoice was paying for. 10 days before the wedding, Daniel came by alone and circled the subject for 20 minutes before he landed it. Would I sign the Maple Street house over to both of them, as a wedding gift? "It's basically ours anyway, Mom," he said. I heard the script behind that sentence more than the sentence itself. I told him big paper gets done right after the honeymoon with the taxes squared, not rushed between the caterer and the cake. He left disappointed and relieved at once. I sat with my coffee and made an appointment with my lawyer instead. Andrew Collins has known me 20 years. I laid it all out on his desk. The note, the deed, my will, which at that time left everything to Daniel. And I told him what I wanted to do. A cashier's check for $51,000, every rent payment my son had ever made me, coming home to him at last. The note forgiven in full. A signed letter of intent to transfer the deed properly after the honeymoon. My actual wedding gift, tucked into a plain white envelope, to be handed over quietly after the toasts I wasn't giving. Andrew asked the question he's paid to ask. And if the girl is what you think she might be? I'd rather find out while the deed still has my name on it, I told him. I carried that envelope for 10 days. I never once imagined the version of the evening where it stayed in my purse. The vineyard, the day of the wedding, looked like every bit of the $47,000 it cost. And every vendor on that property, I noticed, walking the grounds 2 hours early in my mother-of-the-groom shoes, came looking for me. Not the bride. Not Patricia, host of hosts. Me. Because my signature was on their contracts. The ceremony was, I'll say it plainly, beautiful. My son cried at the sight of his bride. And I cried at the sight of him, because underneath the fiction and the pronouns he was still the boy who had carried his father's casket with his jaw set like concrete. He thanked Brooke's family by name in his vows. He did not mention mine. By the time the toasts ended and the band shifted gears, I was sitting at table 9 with the white envelope steady in my lap, telling myself the last word of the night was going to be generous, and it was going to be mine. That was when I saw the venue manager coming across the tent, clipboard raised straight from my chair. And I had no idea yet that his checklist was about to become the loudest thing that happened at that wedding. The venue manager was a nice young man, and none of what happened was his fault. He had a checklist, and the checklist said the balance was due tonight. He leaned in during a lull between songs and set it at exactly clipboard volume. Mrs. Morgan, the remaining balance on the venue and catering. We're running the same card as the deposit, correct? I just need one more signature. The words carried 2 tables in every direction. The way water finds every crack. I saw Forks pause. I saw Patricia Foster go still at the edge of the dance floor, her smile frozen, her eyes doing fast, terrible math. I signed. I folded the receipt into my clutch beside the envelope, and I thanked him. When I looked up, Brooke was already crossing the floor. She came the long way, collecting cheek kisses, so her arrival at my table looked like a bride making rounds and not a woman closing distance. She did not lower her voice. That is the detail that matters. She raised it, tuned to carry. Grace. A little laugh. I'm so glad I caught you. You've done so much, truly everyone knows how involved you like to be. Which is why I hope you'll understand what I'm about to say. Because I mean it with love. She let the room lean in. Cole and I have everything we need now. So the best wedding gift you could give us, honestly, would be you leaving this family for good. The gasp was real. 100 small inhales. The quartet's bow lifting off the strings mid-note. Someone's fork ringing against a plate. I turned my head and looked for exactly one person. Not Brooke, she had told me precisely who she was on schedule in public. I looked past her to my son, standing by the sweetheart table in his tuxedo. He had heard what his wife said to his mother in front of 200 guests, and he looked down at his shoes. He turned his wedding band once, twice, and studied the floor like a man inspecting it for cracks. 3 seconds. Maybe 4. You can live a long time inside 4 seconds. I had bought a decade of not knowing whether anyone would stay if the checks stopped, and there was my answer, written in the top of my son's head. What I felt was not the knife I expected. It was a strange, terrible calm, the feeling at the end of an audit when the number is bad but at least finally it's true. I stood up. I set my champagne down, still full, beside the place card that read Donna, with my small correction on it. I walked out, unhurried, straight-backed, taking out my phone as I went. The terrace was strung with cafe lights, crickets sawing through the vines, the party reduced to shimmer with no sound behind the glass. My hands were not shaking. I want that on the record. Andrew answered on the 3rd ring. Grace, aren't you at the wedding? I am. I need you to take some instructions. I told him to call the note Monday. Formal demand, full principal, with a fair installment option enclosed, because I wasn't trying to drown my son, only wake him. To draft a codicil taking Daniel and his wife out of my will. To start moving the Maple Street deed into my living trust that week. You sure? He asked, the way he'd confirm a wire amount, not an argument. I've never been more balanced in my life. Then I called my bank's after-hours line and stopped every standing transfer. The insurance, the phone plan, The small automatic kindnesses that had been running so long we'd both forgotten I was the one keeping the house warm. 14 minutes, both calls together. I checked. Nothing legal happens in 14 minutes. No deed moves. No will changes between the salad and the cake. But a decision happens all at once like a bone setting, and the paperwork just follows it like a shadow. I walked back into the tent. I did not go to the microphone, that is her instrument, not mine. I crossed the floor while the caterers passed out cake, found my son standing a little apart from his bride, and put my hand on his sleeve soft, for one set of ears only. The note gets called Monday. You'll want to look at what you signed. The house goes into my trust this week. Andrew will send everything in writing, so nobody has to remember anything. Mom, he said, in a voice I hadn't heard since he broke the Hendersons' window. I patted his sleeve, the same 2 pats I'd given him at his father's graveside. Enjoy the party, I said. It's paid for. And I left, past the gift table, past Patricia's frozen smile, my clutch, with the white envelope still inside it, never even slowing. Monday the letters went out exactly as promised. A formal demand on the note, with a gentle $200 a month installment plan stapled behind it, because I am his mother and not a collections agency. A notice to my tenants at Maple Street, not an eviction, 3 honest choices. Stay at market rent like any other adult on that street, buy the house at a real appraisal with their own names on a real mortgage, or take 90 days to relocate. And the codicil, signed Wednesday morning, with the deed moving safely into my trust. I wasn't burning my son's life down. I was handing him for the first time the receipts for it. The voicemails ran the classic cycle. Anger, bargaining, silence. On the 4th one, Daniel had me on speaker without meaning to, and behind his voice I heard Brooks rising, arriving document by document at the actual arithmetic of her marriage. What is this? Why does the deed say the house is hers? You told me the debts were a rumor your mother started. You let me marry a man who owns nothing, she said, at a pitch the speaker couldn't soften. I stood at my counter and listened to a myth collapse in my rental property. Whatever she had priced at my dinner table that first night, it was gone now, all at once, because she had married her way, she believed, out of ever owing anyone, and she had married the most owing man in the county. Thursday, Patricia Foster's silver car pulled into my driveway. Pearls, blowout, a velvet crowbar of a speech about how family doesn't invoice family, about how it would look. A mother blowing up her only son's wedding over a seating chart. I told her I'd been the invoice for 9 years, and that she'd been reading my line items since the engagement. It worked on me for about 6 hours. Karen came over with wine and a plan to post every invoice publicly, let the whole county see who really hosted what. For one long, bright, ugly moment I wanted it. Then I set it down. If I did that, I'd just be her with better math. Theater was their family business. Mine was books that balance in the dark. A few mornings later, Daniel sat at my kitchen table again, unslept, a man learning what his own signature weighs. Brooke was willing to move past it, he said. All of it. If I called Andrew, put everything back, the note, the transfers, the house especially, and apologized at Thanksgiving in front of the family. Said the stress got to me. And then I'd be back in. Holidays. Grandkids someday. Everything I wanted offered back to me whole, for the price of one public apology for a thing that had been done to me, and one signature undoing the only honest paperwork of my life. I refilled his coffee first. Then I told him no. A woman asked 200 people to witness my eviction from this family. I won't stand in front of those same people and call that my fault. Not for holidays. Not even for grandchildren. I gave him real terms instead. Market rent on the house or a real mortgage in his own name or 90 days. $200 a month on the note, whenever he was ready, no ambushes. And the truth plain because it was mine to own. I paid for everything all these years so I would never have to ask whether you'd stay if I stopped. That was my lie. I ran it 9 years and it cost more than the house. I'm done with it. I'll always be your mother. I'm done being your bank. He stood up from my table and found the one sentence with a blade in it. "Then you're going to be alone, Mom?" "Maybe," I said. "But I'll be somebody's mother, not somebody's money. Whenever you can tell the difference, my door works fine." He left. I sat with his cooling coffee and let it be true. The winter that followed was long enough to learn the shape of a new quiet. The wedding photos went up online, a gorgeous album with not one frame of me in it, which by then read less like an insult and more like accurate bookkeeping. 2 cousins stopped calling. At church, a friend squeezed my arm hard enough to leave a mark. How women my age say I know. Daniel and Brooke stayed on Maple Street at full market rent. It arrives on the 1st of the month now by transfer, no note attached. It is the coldest money I have ever received and the cleanest. Thanksgiving happened at my sister's, 12 people, paper napkins, a turkey cooked into jerky. I laughed more than I had in 2 years, and missed my son so hard I had to stand in the bathroom with the fan on. Both things were true. Nobody tells you that getting your spine back comes with a full set of ribs and they all ache for a while. Then, the second week of March, a thin envelope arrived in handwriting that hasn't changed since 8th grade. No letter. Just a check for $200 and on the memo line one word, March. I drove to the bank and deposited it like any properly papered receivable, because that is what respect looks like in my language. In April, a second check came. Under the memo line, small. "Tell Aunt Karen the turkey story made Brooke's mom flinch." It's a start. It's real. The white envelope, the check, the forgiven note, the letter about the deed, is still in my safe deposit box, next to the deed itself. I never shredded it. The gift is still there. So is the door, open for whoever knocks honestly. I turned 59 this summer, and here is the one thing I know now that I didn't know at table 9. If the only chair a family saves for you is the one your money sits in, stand up. You can owe a mother everything and never once be invoiced. And anyone who forgets that was never counting you as family, only counting what they could count on you for.